Okay, we are good.
Okay. Well, the journey for me to take sole control of the company started when my partner had anxiety about our growth path. We had adopted a structure, an industrial capacity. We were doing our own pipe fitting for petroleum projects, and we were doing our own pipe fitting for some light industrial. And as we were growing in our capacity in the industrial sector, my partner lost interest based on the profile of the potential risk, and went out to the market to see if there was anybody interested in acquiring our company. And we had two, at the time, we had two companies interested. One was Dominion Construction. We had discussions with them about acquiring Cormode, and then we had discussions with Churchill Group, which owns Stuart Olson Construction. My partner was keen to exit the business or exit, or at least cash out of the Cormode enterprise. So we began negotiations. The negotiations with Dominion did not come to fruition in a meaningful way. We were clearly offside with value. The Stuart Olson came back with a reasonable proposition. In that proposition, they wanted to absorb my partner into their organization, become a vice president of operations, and they wanted me to become the president of the Cormode branch of their operations, and the Cormode branch would continue with the petroleum-related strategic partnership type work. And we went through about 3 to 6 months of negotiation. We pushed back on the price, said, we want a sweetener. We pushed back on a risk. They capitulated, and we got to a point where my partner said, listen, we've negotiated a really good deal for ourselves. Let's take it and cash out, and you go to work. You take control of Cormode and Dixon on behalf of Churchill Group, and I will move into the Churchill Group of companies and take a smaller role in a bigger organization. I did some soul searching, and my analogy is I would rather rule in my own pond than serve in someone else's ocean. I had no appetite to be controlled by the Churchill Group in terms of what we did, our value proposition, who we'd pay, how we'd pay, our vendor relationships, our client relationships, and our employee relationships. So I disagreed with my partner. We had a meeting, and he suggested that if I would agree to the price that Churchill offered, that he would sell his shares to me. And I deliberated for 15 seconds and said, yes, absolutely. I said, we have to come to terms with how to buy those shares. We created a 5-year earn-out, and we documented all of our discussions. My partner retired. We established an earn-out, and then 3 years later, I paid him out in full, and I had a full control, and I acquired the business.
So when you then kind of acquired the business, and now like you were kind of in the operating seat of control, and your partner was doing more of the financial kind of controller stuff. What were some of the kind of changes that now you had the full reins and the leadership control of where the company was going to pivot? What were a few of the key things that you did, that you initiated as soon as you became kind of full shareholder, because you saw things like a different way? Now, you and I have very, I want to say very different. We have different views on risk and how we overcome risk. And you had it sounds like the same experience with your other partner, but in that relationship, you were willing to take on a little bit more risk in some components than he was willing to look at risk and opportunity and what you were capable of. But were there a couple things that you insisted on changing that weren't changed when you were partners, that you were able to do when you were the sole owner?
What I identified as a gap in my capacity as sole owner was probably more on the strategic, higher level, where are we going, what are we doing? I
Mm-hmm.
was operationally quite intensely focused on, putting together a good project with a good bid, with a good team, executing a good outcome. And I had to move away from an operations role more to a leadership role. And I think that was about 2006. I went looking for a group and I found the organization called Tech. And it's an organization where you come together with 12 or 15 different companies once a month. You discuss your businesses and what you're doing from a macro perspective. They bring in guest speakers that talk about everything from HR to cash management to outcomes management, processes, systems, personal integrity, employee integrity, vendor integrity, all those kinds of elements that are related to high level management of a company. I joined that organization and I used them as an informal board of directors. I would bounce up if I had concerns at a higher level, I would bounce where in the previous I would bounce ideas off my partner. We would conference on that, between our CFO, my partner, and myself. Now having just the CFO, I joined this organization and used them as my informal board of directors to help me steer and make decisions at the higher level.
Gotcha. So were there was it more on the changes in the types of clients that you guys were pursuing? Because you said you very emerged in the petroleum world. Was there a shift when you said let's not just pigeonhole ourselves, and you began to kind of shift because you did have a pipe company that you told me that and you can touch on it like about selling that industrial kind of division off and then beginning to kind of titrate a little bit away from just petroleum into commercial buildings, warehouses, multifamily, mixed use, oil field camps like that $100 million deal you did up in Fort Mac.
One of the elements that kind of controls your ability to grow is your cash flow and your available cash. The industry that we work in works on a ratio of 20 to 1. If you have $1 million in equity, you can probably do $20 million in construction volume. And that 20 to 1 ratio was kind of restricting to a degree. You have to earn profits, put them into retained earnings, and then go forward. So the questions I would typically bring to my board of directors was relevant to an opportunity to take on a bigger job, perhaps a $20 million job would escalate us from a $40 million company to a $60 million company. And then I would ask if there's any strategies and any barriers or any blind spots that I didn't see. I would present the opportunity. I would get feedback from my group, and invariably they would say, go ahead. One of the, I would call it a turning point for our company is I held the company in fairly tight growth until a point in time. And when I presented it to my group, I said, the question was, do we have permission to grow when my delivery, if previously we were 98 or 99% job delivery satisfaction, we had slipped down to, let's say, a 95 or a 94 delivery because we had grown and I was less intimate with all the work and not able to touch it all and supervise it all. And I had this opportunity to grow, and I presented it to our group, and I said, do we have permission to grow when we hit 94, 95% execution? Or, should I focus my time on getting that back up to 98, 99? And the consensus around the table was that, a business that does 95 is effectively doing 100%. So you should grow and establish, accountabilities and structure and go to things like performance reviews, employee evaluations to kind of answer the call on the productivity. So I looked at that, and we started another company. We started up in one of the other markets. We started doing more like condo work, more institutional work, design build schools, we design build churches, we design build a lot more work. We opened up our staff, and that was about 2007. At the heels of that meeting, I created a strategic plan, and the plan was 10 branches by the year 210. So we had 3 years to get to 10 branches. So we opened up a branch in Saskatoon, Regina. We opened up a branch in Ontario. We opened up a branch in Whitehorse, Fort McMurray, Calgary, Kelowna, and we opened up our industrial branch. And we had 10 offices. We achieved our 10 branches by the year 210. Each profit center was to have achieved a $1 million bottom line, and we were nominating shareholders. Our managers in our various offices were given opportunities to buy into the company, into their branch, and run their branch successfully, and take a share of it, up to a third, even up to a half if they had the equity to do that.
Gotcha. Okay, so then when you so you kind of got to that point that you've got these branches, you're doing different styles of work. Is the focus still solely doing construction management, or like I remember when you and I spoke that one day we were having a beer on your deck, and we were talking about what would you change? You said the one thing that you would change when you would go back to being my age at 36 was that you would have shifted to doing more of the development role as opposed to just the construction management role, and that's why people are wanting to, they're dabbling, right? They've got a piece of property, maybe it's an acre or 2 acres. They've owned it for a while. They're not sure what to do. So were there kind of like little hints along the way when you were kind of looking at your clients or looking at people that you had, you've known for a decade or two, and they kind of went the development role, and you kind of started maybe shifting your thinking a little bit, being like, man, maybe it's nicer to be working for a 30% difference between cost and value in the market if they sell these multifamily units or whatnot, instead of just competing on what is a very hard task. Like construction execution is on a 2-year project is not an easy feat, right? To manage it from tip to tail, from fences to porta potties to steel to warranty, right? Like you got a lot of work there to compete on a single digit, mostly construction management fee. Was there a time when you kind of had that epiphany to be like, man, maybe I want to start doing my own little developments or expanding and leveraging time of other people to do work for me?
Yeah, there was. I started adding. I've in soliciting work, we would find a client that would offer a 25% share in a deal, and that offer probably happened almost on every deal. It was uncanny how much the potential clients were interested in having a contractor as a partner. And I always had in my mind's eye the discipline that said, I'm a good contractor. I'm not a developer. I'm not a partner. I'm not going to be putting cash into this deal. I can help you out. My best value proposition to you is the construction. And having gone through that and worked for clients that kind of wandered into my office with a bit of an idea about doing something like storage or an apartment building, they knew very little, if anything, about it. They found us online, and they sit across my desk, and we ink out a value proposition for them, because it begin with the end in mind. Okay, let's talk about your customer. Let's talk about the business. Let's talk about what's the rent, what's the revenue, so what are your hard costs, what are your soft costs, what's your capex? Let's go with that. Okay, now that's your capex. So this is what we can build. We can stage it, and then a client would say, okay, this all sounds good. I said, okay, you got to find some money, or if you got the land as equity, you can borrow. Client goes out, borrows the money. We execute the deal and build it all out. And like you said, 5%, 7% fees, and we think we're making money as a contractor. And I finish out a project for a client, 12 months, 14 months. He goes into the market and leases up his facilities, and he gets to 100% occupancy. And then he goes to the bank for an appraisal, and his $3 million, $3.2 million spend appraises out at $8 million.
Wow.
And it's a wake-up call for me. And my client phones me, and he's like giddy. He said, "What should we do now?" And I said, "Well, buy me lunch and we'll talk." So we go for lunch, and I said, if I were you, I would double up that facility, and I would buy another facility on the other side of town. When the volume is that hot, that strong, your competition's going to see it and they're going to build.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, unless you build first. Okay, he says, let's plan that out. So we did. We doubled the size of his facility. He bought land again. Now he's got, upwards of 250,000 square feet of facilities. It's 100% leased. Um, he buys, he sells, he buys out his original partner for 2.5 or 3 million bucks, and then he gets a new partner who writes a check for 16 million bucks cash, and he still owns half of it.
Yeah.
So I look at that, and I've got that story probably a dozen different times where I've taken people who kind of wandered onto the radar vis-a-vis our website, and I said, have you thought about getting into the rental business? Have you thought about getting into the storage business? Have you thought about getting into the gas and convenience store retail business, right? And what we've done is come alongside them almost like a business consultant, where we talk about what's your value proposition to the market. And the old adage of begin with the end in mind. We'll design the project to suit your end user, your end customer. So if you're successful in business, then it's a successful construction project.
Mm-hmm.
You won't have to worry about grinding us on the last 1 or 2% of our fee, because we help you with this. And that's been our model, and it's allowed us to earn, kind of, I think, a point or two better than average construction fees. But at some point, you got to wake up and say, these guys, most of them, wouldn't be able to carry my briefcase, and I'm showing them how to make this deal work, and then they've got the guts and they believe my story. They go out, get the banking, and go do the deal, and they come back and they're high-fiving me and saying thank you, thank you, thank you. And now half of these guys, if not all of them, can buy and sell me. They've just made it. They've been in business for Allard. Chuck Allard came in and we did his facility. Talked about staging, talked about all the phasing, all the things that have to go with it. He built it out. Cost him $6.8 million, I think, in roughly is what we charged him to build it out. He sold it for just under 20 million bucks 2 years later.
Yeah, and I think like that's one of the things of like having the history of making other people a lot of money, and that's one thing that you and I have been able to do in our careers, from you on the execution side and me on the innovation side, of putting deals together and galvanizing teams and seeing pockets of value that can be created. And I think those are the key things of being able to look at a deal, and like you said, like the people independently, they don't even know how to do it, right? Like they can't even get the project off the ground. They don't know the nuances that are in construction, the pre-construction processes that I'll be running, the post-construction and during or pre-construction, stuff that you'll be running when it comes to the constructionology behind it, and stuff that Jenna does on design, and making sure that there's an understanding of the difference between cost and price, right? And we were on a call the other day, me and Jennifer, design like pre-design on a building, and the owner decided that, hey, do you know what, I want to do all my own interior design work. And we were like, okay, well, like typically we don't do this kind of work because we're way too efficient to be hourly, because there's no incentive for us to be hourly, because you'll write a check, say, oh yeah, we'll pay you $2.25 an hour to do XYZ. And it's like, well, yeah, but I could get you the result in a half a day, because I know the products, I know the suppliers, I have the relationships, I know what's coming in style, I know what doesn't work, right? And I think that that's the difference between, cost is what you pay and the price is what you can almost lose out on, right? Because you make the decisions, you own the responsibilities, and then the price is too much, because now they got a building that aesthetically doesn't look good. The kitchen design doesn't work. The tile doesn't match. It's kind of hodgepodge lobby and the exterior colors or whatever, because they wanted to do their own thing. And I think that's one thing that in the real estate world too, there's a lot of these DIY individuals, and they can do a little house. They can do maybe a duplex. They can maybe even do like a block of 4 townhomes on 2 sites or something like that. But when it comes to going over that $2 million of hard cost on a project, that's when they get out of their depth. Like there isn't a program that you get 1,000 real estate investors that they go to a weekend, and in one weekend they learn to be a project manager, like Sebastian or Michelle or Rodney, or like there isn't the training for that. You need a decade or more in there to be credible. And I think that's one thing too, where as the the evolution of core mode as you kind of walk through that process and you get to this new way of thinking that you now know that you can request that your best value proposition is design, but it's also coming along as a partner because relationships reduce risk, and the risk of it is it's the warranty period, right? It's the, well, what happens post construction, and if you have a bad contractor, and is he going to show up and do the warranty, and how do you mitigate that risk of being like, well, is he going to do a good job? Is he going to overcharge me? Is it a warranty item? Is it a repair item from a damage of a tenant? Versus, like you said, having a partner, the partner is just like, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, you command a lot of work in a year, and if you're phoning somebody and there's like, oh, Ben, it's a day out of warranty. It's like, yeah, it's a day out of warranty, but I give you $4 million a year in roofing. Just go fix it. As opposed to when there's a smaller contractor or an individual, they don't have that $4 million of work giving to a roofing contractor. They give them maybe one job, and that one job is less than 100 grand a year, right? And so they don't have that relationship depth where they're willing to go above and beyond the kind of standard customer service because they're saying, well, hey, we've been working with Ben, been working with Core Mode for 20 years or 15 years or whatever the story is, and they give us, 8%, 9%, 20, 30% of our work in a year. We want to respect that relationship. And I think that's the big thing that I've learned in the construction world and in the development world is that it all comes down to the high trust relationships. Will they honor their word? Will they give you their best and then some? And will they honor their workmanship opportunities to you, right? And so do you have any stories of projects where you've worked with trades or suppliers that really went above and beyond kind of what you even thought that they would do because of the high trust relationship that they have with you?
Well, in the petroleum sector, we had a complement of sub-trades that we went back to time in, time out, all the time. And in the petroleum sector, there was, if you look at the value proposition for the average petroleum company, there was an issue around quality had to be there. There was an issue around schedule because they were publicly exposed, and there's a huge issue around safety because of exposure as well, and there's an issue around price. But if you took those four value props and prioritized them, price would be at the bottom of the list because it's a multi-billion-dollar company and they're building a retail distribution for their end product. So safety is probably their number one priority, schedule their number two priority, quality their number three priority, and price is their number four. So in that environment, we go out and solicit trades that would honor us. So we have a very stringent safety program. So you got to do every day, every morning you have to get into the job shack with all your men. You talk about how you stay safe. You have to do near miss reporting. You have to, you're operating as if you're in a refinery. And that's for Shell, Esso, Petrocan, Husky, all the major oils. So to do that, you got to train and teach your sub trades, and you got one or two trades in every category and they all can capitulate. And that was so strategically aligning yourself with a client was paramount, and then aligning yourself with a deck of trades that could honor the commitment that you made to your client. That was critical. So we cultured those relationships. We had barbecues on site. We would do year-end parties with them, and they were part of our delivery strategy, almost as critical to our delivery as employees were. And the other thing that was really critical, so if safety was number one, schedule was number two, one of the value propositions that we would offer is say a service station was going to go down for a new set of tanks. They talked about their clients on their cycle. An average client would fill up once every week or 10 days. So if they could take a station down, they said that an average client would give them grace for one cycle. So if the station was down and they were going to looking to buy gas, and the station that they always buy gas at was closed for renovations, they go somewhere else, fill up, and they're sort of good for that 20-day window, 22 weeks to 20-day window. On the second round, if the station is still shut down, they they tend to then go someplace and not come back. So their attrition rate on client retention goes down relevant to the schedule. So they would make us put together a schedule where we would not exceed 2 weeks with a complete knockdown and rebuild. So then we would bring all our trades into the office and we would schedule out the job every half hour, and we would go for 16 or 18 hours a day, and we would go for the period, and we'd have the job turned over. When we turned that job over inside that window, we did it safe, we did it fast, we did it, the quality was there, the price didn't matter, so everybody had a nice lift on their margin to do that, and the oil company had a nice lift because they would get sometimes 85 to 90% of their clients back in the next cycle. And if they dropped it to 2 cycles or 3 cycles, their retention would go down to 50%, 55%. So it put a lot of emphasis on us, even though it's kind of looks like a relatively small, easy job on the corner of nowhere and nowhere. We operated like we're in a refinery. We operated on a schedule. We scheduled every half hour for 18 hours a day for two full weeks. And they look at it and say, "Oh, gee, that was easy, right? The tanks, the piping, all that stuff, the electrical, on the ground, put the canopy back up, put the store back in play, and you're in business, right?"
Mm-hmm.
What that did for us is it made us really good at construction, right? We were able to plan, we were able to execute, we were able to plan to be safe. We still followed all the safety protocols, and we still, we would run 2 shifts, 2 shifts a day, sometimes a third shift. And we took that discipline into the industrial sector. That gave us a permit, a passport into the industrial. And then we opened up. I hired an industrial manager, and we started doing pipeline work. We would run 40 or 50 miles of pipeline up north in the tundra. We would do turnaround work. We did a compressor site for Trans Mountain. It was an 18,000 horsepower compressor. It was 40 feet long, 11 and a half foot diameter. It sat on 200 piles. It was when these guys came from Germany to set the compressor, they were shimming it with pieces of tin foil. They said if it was even 1/1000th out of alignment, it spun at like 40,000 RPM. He said it would blow up. So the gas that it was compressing, the facility we built was all 48-inch pipe, 900 psi pressures in the pipeline for natural gas. We finished that job in about 16 months. It was a $120 million project in and of its own right. And we were considered, at the time, one of TransCanada's premier vendors for that kind of work because of our execution. And that execution came through the discipline that we got doing these, ma and pa gas bars on the corner, right? Doing them inside of a 2-week window.
Yeah.
And getting trades and vendors.
So then, how did you take those disciplines? So, like, I worked for the Alberta Carpenters Union for a very short time so that I could get my journeyman status as a carpenter. Because you can do 1 year and you can challenge the rest, right, in your carpentry apprenticeship. So I worked at the Shell refinery in Edmonton on like 98th Avenue out to Sherwood Park, and like it was insanely stringent. Just to by the time you show up and you check in and you do safety meetings and you do all those things, how do you then take those skill sets? So if anybody is anything about industrial calculations and the calibrations and the accuracies that you need, like shimming a steel pile with tin foil to get it to 1/1000th of an inch kind of CNC level accuracy. How do you then take those methodologies and then when you applied them into like the multifamily world, which is a completely different world, right? Like I remember being on those sites when I was framing a decade ago, and it was Cowboy Town, USA. Like it was anything went on those sites. The quality of work, the lack of inspections, like the sloppiness in comparison to what's demanded of you at Esso, right? Like how did you then when you started building multifamily wood frame, light gauge steel, structural steel stud, those kinds of residential and mainly let's just talk about the residential buildings, multifamily buildings. Where were your kind of hurdles with that, especially coming into the British Columbia market, going from an Alberta market where there's a trade mentality that's very different than a BC mentality. How did you kind of use those skill sets in the industrial world to bring forward and meet times and schedules when it comes to erecting multifamily properties versus a 40-mile pipe kind of component for an oil field company? Like, what were the big differences in the shifts in those two spheres of work for you?
When you kind of venture out to do something like an apartment, and you have to identify what is important, right? Where on an industrial job, safety trumps everything. On an open market job, the budget trumps everything. It trumps safety, it trumps quality, it trumps schedule, right? It's all about the numbers. It took a while to kind of get that, kind of internalized, but the reality was you can't run double-breasted. You can't take your crews out, spend money training them on Scott air packs and safety training and working at heights and working on lifts and, spend all that money training these guys and then send them out to an open market commercial job where none of that stuff matters. Nobody really cares. You're sitting in a job shack doing toolbox kickoff meetings while your competition is out there, running shoe crew with no hard hats and no t-shirts on, getting a suntan while they're out framing. And you're looking like the poster boy for the safety commercial because your guys are all in hard hats and harnesses and safety boots, and you're not letting them wear even short sleeve shirts because, blah, blah, blah. So you can't run double breasted. You got to, so we opened up a couple of different enterprises. We had Cormode Mainstay, which was petroleum related, and the Cormode Industrial was a company that we started, and then we started Cormode Kelowna, Cormode Calgary, Cormode Fort Mac, and each company had a different mandate. So when we would do an industrial job, it would happen with the full complement of safety and all the issues, and they would hire their guys, and their guys, there was no cross-pollination. You couldn't take guys out of the industrial, put them on a commercial job. You would drive them nuts. And you couldn't take a commercial guy and stick him on an industrial job. He would be, run off the job right away. And where that really hit home is when we worked up at Syncrude and Suncor with our guys, and they get mandatory drug testing. Just about everybody on the commercial side drinks. Even if they have 2 beers or 3 beers a night, there's no way they're getting through drug and alcohol test to get on a Syncrude site, right? And unless they're Houdinis on hiding, like bringing someone else's pee samples in underneath their coat or something like that, they can't. They don't even get a permit to be on the job site, to be honest. So it really is about, okay, now we got another discipline. This is open market work. We do that differently, and blah blah blah. And quite frankly, I think living in the industrial world is a higher form of life. You earn more for your activities. You can charge more money for what you're doing, but you absolutely have to execute. There's absolutely, you slip and stumble, you're going to be in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I can relate a story where we had a fatality on a job site, and we were working for Esso up in North Battleford. We had Esso had a problem with contamination. We had a tank cleaning crew, so we would go around the country with our crew. We would open up underground tanks. We'd have confined space entry, hazard entry. We'd go in there with Scott air packs. We'd go in and clean the tanks, get all the soot taken out, and we would recertify the tanks and close them back up and go out. And it's high risk, we got a good reward for it. So in North Battleford, they had a bulk fuel site, and they had contamination in the bottom of their tanks. So they wanted us to clean the tanks. In order to do that, we had to empty, and these bulk tanks, I think it took like 22 B trains to empty one tank. So we would have the carrier come to the job site, and we would transfer all the fuel from the tank into the trucks. We'd enter the tank, clean the tank, get it certified, get back out, and then pump the fuel back into the tanks. So the trucks were on lease. This was going to be a 2.5, 3 day enterprise, highly intense, fully paid. So we were talking about increasing our schedule. So we wanted, they said the plant had 5 horsepower pumps capable of whatever, 55 to 60 gallons a minute flow rates. We had this many thousand gallons. Could we increase our pump? So we said we can go to a 15 horsepower pump. We can triple our flow rates. And I had some concerns about internal with the product. I said I've never pumped gas at 15 horsepower pumps at 500 gallon a minute type flow rates. I said I'm a little uncomfortable with this because I haven't seen it before. So I went to the refinery at Esso and I contacted one of the engineers I know there, and I showed him our schematics of what we were going to do and where we're going to put the pump and how we're going to fill the trucks. And he came back, and the issue is static electricity. Fuel accumulates static electricity over time when you pump it, and it gets turbulent. Anyways, he came back and he gave us a design for a relaxation chamber. We actually doubled it, and then we put the thing that he signed off on it. He gave me a signature on his design, and then we set the design up, and we went to execute. We filled up about 3 trucks, and on the 4th truck, we had an explosion on the truck. The so the operator on the truck was one of our petroleum guys, and what happened was the fuel accumulates static electricity as it gets turbulently pumped, and it goes through a relaxation chamber. So which is really like it's getting pumped with 6-inch line, and then it goes into like a 14-inch diameter pipe for 20 feet, and it slows the flow rate down, and then the static electricity dissipates into the wall of the pipe, and the pipe is grounded. But if your pipe is too small and you don't get enough relaxation, the static charge carries forward. So when they filled the trucks up, as the tank in the truck gets closer to the surface, the static electricity, much like when you rub your feet on a carpet and you go to touch somebody's cheek, a quarter inch before their cheek, the spark jumps. The same thing happened in the fuel truck, and it created an explosion. We were pumping diesel at the time, but the load ahead of us in the truck was probably high test or aviation or premium, and it had an explosive. LEL was 100, and it exploded. Our guy caught fire. It soaked him, caught fire, jumped off the truck, and he was like a human wick. He got 2 fire extinguishers before we got him put out, or they put him out on the site. Sent him to the hospital, and he was given about 12 hours of life to get his family there to do his last rites, and he died. We had a big inquiry, and in that inquiry, we had to go to the Solicitor General. The RCMP were involved. It was a fatality inquiry, and you have to answer. And they couldn't find one. They couldn't find one flaw in our system and our process, and they couldn't find even an outdated safety manual or anything wrong. We had 100% execution on all the requirements for safety. And the guy from Esso came up and said, we rely on you guys for your technical expertise. This was your job. I said, well, I felt we were a little over our head on this thing, so I went to the Esso refinery to get a design. He said, no, you didn't. I said, yeah, I did. He said, can you approve that? I said, well, just a minute. Let me get my office to fax me the design. So they faxed it. I put it on the table, and they said, we need a 1-hour recess to review this. And then they came back from recess, and they said, and they had people there from Toronto, and like their whole team.
Sure.
And they said, we're going to put this meeting in adjournment and recess it, and we're going to, if we need to come back to it, we'll come back in a couple of weeks. And the whole thing got swept under the carpet. We didn't have any liability. We had to clean up the site. We had to do all that work. We got paid we got 100% paid out on everything. And my point was that we were excellent in execution. And it doesn't mean it's not risky business, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
because you engineer all this stuff out of it. You think you're engineering all the risk out of it doesn't mean you're 100% risk free. So
Yeah, and I think that translates even into the multifamily side, into the real estate development, rental market pool. You can have all the dots and T's crossed, and I remember pre-COVID, I had a deal that was ready to be financed and everything else, and then COVID hit, and banks started tightening their drawstrings, and all of a sudden, it didn't really matter anymore that you had an irrevocable letter of credit at the bank for millions.
yeah,
What are you going to do? Sue them? Right? Like it changes. Doesn't matter the math, the science, the signatures. If there's a risk opening, um, you know, there's always something that you can't mitigate risk down to zero. You can't do it in the industrial world, and obviously that's a very anybody who's listening that has a friend, an uncle, maybe themselves or an aunt that worked in that field, they know the how rigid it is versus, like you said, the residential market. Like when I was framing residentially, way different than framing on a commercial site. But even those were very, very, very lax, on the expectations, the quality, even sometimes of the individual's integrity and their work ethic. Between a framing carpenter on a residential site, he wouldn't survive on a multifamily site, and that framer wouldn't survive on an industrial steel erection crew for something, right? Like it's just the caliber of how they think, and you can't mitigate risk down to zero. And I think that part of that too is like anybody who is, extremely risk averse, in real estate development, they're unable to they're unable to get risk to zero. And I think some people have a really hard time with that because they think that it's too risky to do. And my thought is like, well, it's too risky not to do anything because I don't know how people are going to survive. I'm 36, you're 66. We have 3 decades of age difference. So we see the world differently, but we see the world the same in a lot of different ways. And I think that there will be a further inability that if people that are my age don't develop some skill multiplier, the ability for them to earn an income when they are 66 to be able to provide for themselves, their family, their kids, to do something, they have to have some level of a multiplier to be able to increase their income, which means they have to be able to take some level of a risk to venture out and learn a new skill or something that can multiply their income. And I think it's the same thing with people who own land and opportunities. It's too risky to do development. It's too risky to start a project. It's the interest rates are too high. It's this, like there's so many reasons of risk. And I think that when they're able to go through and they're able to see that doing nothing is riskier, right? Sitting on your hands with a piece of land, holding up, not pulling the trigger. I mean, you and I work with clients like that all the time. It's a great project. They sit on their hands, they just wait, and they waste time, and then they lose momentum, and now they've got increased or increased competition in the market because now other people built the same kind of property. Now they're going to get the buyers, they're going to get the clients, they're going to who are going to take them up. And I think that's one thing, in the comparison, like you were talking between the industrial side of things, when you can engineer everything down to zero, and there are still so many unknown things in construction. Even on the Oasis project, when you were telling me about, you had it all planned out, ready to go. Logistics, everything was lined up. You were good. And then boom, COVID, supply chain issues, steel, shipping, labor, schedule. Pretty hard to run a anybody who tried running a business, much less a construction site, when you've got dozens of men on site from different companies. How do you run a safety program on site for COVID when you've got wind blowing and cranes and trucks and people like it's next to impossible to run a site successfully and have a zero risk site. And I think, like you said, it all comes down to the people that you hire, the people that you trust on your team, and really being able to keep that into the design of a successful project. So is it like that happened at that industrial plant, and that's extremely, like, it's unfortunate. I can't imagine what that must have been like. I know you have a big heart for other people, and to know that happened and that impacted a family to such a degree, it's awful. Yeah, and like I can't imagine what it was like for the coworkers, for the team, for the the emotional, mental, spiritual healing that had to happen across so many different facets of your company. When you're looking, at that kind of component, how does that experience, how does that play into your risk assessment when you're doing like trickier buildings, like things like the Oasis, which is not a typical building. It's not just a box that's tall, right? It's not just a big warehouse. It's a very, technical process. How do you personally get involved in more complex projects, and like at what level does Ben kind of start in a project, and then once that project essentially is starting, when do you essentially kind of transfer the reins to one of your senior staff?
Yeah, that's the problem, right? That's where I've been unable to develop a succession strategy because what I offer, what I bring to the discussion on this is this risk assessment and how do we fail safe? And like, what's our plan B? What's our plan C? And how do we mitigate? And I've grown into that capacity when you hand somebody a project and they have to be your agent for risk assessment and work, it invariably falls short. I mean, they get into a set of details and a set of circumstances they can't get their way out. They didn't foresee it. They didn't plan it. And so this back to this 10 offices. We shut down, Kelowna and Whitehorse and Regina, Saskatoon. When things started to get tight and tough, they didn't have the mechanism to deal with that. So today, what works for me today is that I will work on stuff as long as I can touch it and feel it, and I can add value. Right? If I can't, if I got to hand it off to somebody else and say, okay, here's the performer, go do it. I mean, what what's really fundamental to the value proposition that we offer is the spread between value and cost. We can drive cost, and it's not at any price. We're not driving cost at the risk of quality or at the risk of safety or at the risk of schedule. We're driving costs because we want to be intelligent. We want to create intelligent design, efficient design, effective design. If I give you an example, a little bit out of school but current, is the architectural proposals for the Kelowna project. We have proposals that are completely written for like a complete scope of work for sub $100,000, and we have three architectural proposals that can capture the same scope of work, and they're all over $300,000. So you look at that and say, how can you rationalize the difference? Like how does one guy, the guy at 300,000 bucks, I would never tell him I got a project, I got a cost at 100,000 or less than 100, because he's simply going to say you can't do it for that. And I said, you can. In fact, I got two proposals that are less than that. Both of those proposals have a back office in a foreign country. They're simply, their cost of back office is like a 10% of what the Kelowna company's cost of back office is. What he's paying his draftsmen, his clerical staff, his admin staff is not even in the same time zone, right? So you look at that, and you if you understand that's the case, you can do that across every trade scope. You can get the well-established, mature mechanical guys that have been in business for 30 years. They've got all their routines, all their stuff going on, their holidays, their trucks, they're very well-established business. And then you get the upstart, which is typically new to country, maybe from Eastern Europe or something, and grew up in poverty, and now they've got a chance to be in the can. They become a plumber. They got a plumbing ticket. Now they're in their own plumbing business. And you know what? The first question out of their mouth is, can we work 12 hours a day? When you work with a mature, established company, the first question is, how is it, when, like, is this a 7 to 3 job, or is it going to be an 8 to 4 job? Like, is it going to be 7.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, in 2 years, or is it going to be 12 hours a day in 1 year?
Mm-hmm.
So you don't compromise the value, but you have to find the value solutions, right?
Yeah.
You really have to find the cost efficient solutions. So if you've grown up in that world, and I have, you culture relationships with high performance trades that can execute for a price. They're a little bit more, a little less formal. They tend to do their paperwork on the kitchen table with their wife at night, right? But they can work, and they work hard because it's an opportunity for them to get ahead. You find that trade, then you can really stretch the value proposition between cost and value. And
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, as long as you don't compromise your quality, your schedule, your safety, and you supervise those guys to their capacity, allow them to produce what they can do best, and make up where they have gaps. If they have gap in safety, backstop them. If they have gap in quality, get your foreman out there to help them lay it out. Or if they got gap in wherever they have a gap, you help them. And you say, you virtually say thank you for participating in this company because we really appreciate your price and we're going to help you get through it.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough thing too, where I've consulted on a a fair amount of other people's development projects, and I think that one of the things that I see consistently is they do a lot of tendering, and they build their budgets based off of quote market prices, right, and what they get that comes in, and I'm like, you can't, and this is one of the things I not relearned, but it was reinforced by working with you about like we're a numbers driven company. Like we have designer outcomes, client outcomes that we're looking for, certain restrictions, and then based off those, we have certain budgets that we have to work within for materials, for labor install rates, for site, general conditions, stuff like that. And I think that there's a lot of the market where there's always the, oh, well, we can sell it for more. We can just sell it for more. That'll solve the problem. And they don't get into this, cost segregation studies on their supply chain. They don't look at their supply chain as a profit center. They just say, oh, well, we'll just sell it to the market for more, right? And the Okanagan is like that, like it's always like, oh, like people will buy for more because more people want to move here, right? And it's a, our house, it's like we look at houses on our street, like there's this one house that it's got a, again, market test fit. It's a walkout house, but you walk downstairs to the kitchen, and the main floor is where the bedrooms are, the guest bedrooms are, and it's this nice big open area, and you have this nice, kind of view over the valley. That's 2 stories, but you lose the whole value proposition of the frickin' house, which is a one level living, right? And that house has been for sale since before we moved in. We've been here for 9 months. That house has been on the market for over a year. No one even goes and looks at it because it's such an oddball. No one wants that. Like the designer, they thought it was cool. They might live there, but the market's just like, no, I want a bungalow, like a rancher style, one level living, everything. I don't got to walk downstairs with my groceries. I don't got to walk downstairs with my laundry, right? And it's such a bizarre, kind of a design that people forget about the I guess the vertical integration of like market test fit. What does the market actually want? How do you work with your trades to kind of capture that? You and I were talking once about drywalling companies where they're not sophisticated guys. Like I was a carpenter. I was not a sophisticated guy when I started my business. I could bang up a wall faster than most other people. That was my skill set. But I didn't know a dang thing about pricing, safety, WCB or anything like that. But these companies that are importing a lot of these guys, they'll charge the management fees and they'll hire 10 different drywall subtrades versus you can go hire those same 10 different drywall subtrades. You can save the markup. You can control the management flow. You can backstop them, like you said, for the different parts of the business that they're not really, really good at, but you just need them to hang board. You just need them to drywall and tape. You don't need them to be phenomenal safety communicators. You can put a person in the business to help them with that. And I think that's one of the vertical integrations that you've done well, and bringing, Alberta trades, bringing Saskatchewan trades, bringing guys in from Vancouver, because the Okanagan market is very fickle. The mentality here is you better be on the water by 2:30 and you better be wrapping up, at, 2 o'clock so that you can be driving away at 2:29 versus in Alberta. If you touch the tool, if you shut the compressor off before 5:05, you were getting punched in the face because you were going to finish that roof. You were going to finish that truss lift. You're going to do whatever. And the work mentality is very different. in between the markets. So what we'll do is Ben, do you have anything else, like any final thoughts kind of on the stuff that we've been talking about today before we talk about next episode?
No, if just you know, we're kind of getting used to this a little bit, so I'm good with. I mean, it depends what you want to know. Maybe you don't want to hear all those other stories, but
Well, we'll get into it another time. So why don't on the next one, why don't we dive into, kind of a memorable project, a relationship with a client that you were able to create some, massive success for, where you were able to help them earn a lot of money through a project that was designed well, executed well, and you can kind of, just tell us the story from like the inception, the stuff you did on the pre-construction, and walk us through kind of what is a standard 1 to 2 year project. From the time that you're starting in the conversations when they sit at your boardroom and they authorize, on an enhanced business relationship agreement, to the time that they get the possession paperwork and the warranty paperwork, upon completion. We can walk through a project in Western Canada that you've done, on maybe the multifamily or mixed use or something like that side of things, so that it's a little bit more relatable for the average listener. And then we can kind of start from the land assessment, from where I can look at it on the front, or where I look at projects from the, is it bankable, is it feasible, and then you can talk a little bit more about the constructionology, the process of an EBR, how you came up with that process, and how it served you and customers very well for the last decade and a half. Sound good to you?
yeah.
All right.
So what